Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Omnia Performance Podcast. Today, you're being hosted by head coach Kieran, and I'm joined by our in-house performance nutritionist, Tom. And today, we're going to be talking about ultra running. So we're going to do a little bit of back and forth. I'm going to talk about some of the training aspects and how we can prepare you for ultra distance endurance. And Tom is going to talk about some of the nutrition aspects that go into fueling and performance. So Tom, I'm going to hand over to you. Would you like to talk about some of the most common things that we see day in, day out working with our ultra endurance athletes?
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, great to be here. Look, with nutrition and anything ultra marathon related, whether we're looking at a single day event or a multi-day event, it's a real fueling challenge. And I think if it's a step up, if you've done a marathon, you've run it probably somewhere between 2.5 to 4 hours, and it's all about staying topped up if you're running a marathon. Whereas an ultra is really about managing energy for hours and hours while keeping the gut happy and also keeping the mind sharp, because you might be going through the night, you might have difficult terrain, there's potentially more cognitive demand as well. A lot of DNFs, or a lot of very long duration ultras, if you end up kind of walking a lot of it, essentially come from underfueling, where people do not consume enough, whether you've not practiced it, whether you struggle to tolerate it, whether you physically, logistically, if you start fueling too late. What we see is if people typically consume under kind of 200 calories per hour or under 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, you're going to have a really rough time. So very, very big picture here is understanding the huge energy demand that comes on race day, but also with your training as well. And it's making sure that you aim to start big training sessions, big training weeks, and race day itself as full as you possibly can in terms of muscle and liver glycogen. You have a system and a strategy in place that means you can eat early, you can eat consistently, and then also you can maintain fluid and potentially sodium balance as well. You want to try and remove any stress and worry on race day in terms of trying new things. Hopefully you've got a really kind of robust strategy. But overall, that energy availability is key. If you underfuel your training, it's potentially going to blunt adaptation, it's going to blunt recovery, it's going to suppress your immune function. You're just not going to have a very good time. And the same with race day. If you want to thrive rather than survive, it's all about having that fueling strategy in place that's going to get you from A to B.
I think that point about the step up in duration is a really nice segue into everything I was going to talk about for the first point, because I think it's so easy to forget, particularly with how many ultra events are trail based, just how much longer you're going to be on your feet for compared to, particularly if you take something like a 50k ultra. Obviously on paper, it's not that much further than a marathon, but given that most are going to be on the trails, you're looking at several hours more on your feet. And I think that's massively overlooked, both in, as you've mentioned, the nutrition side, but the training aspect. And the point that I like to bring up to everybody is that robustness, that being your ability to not get hurt either in the event or through the high volume training that you're inevitably going to be doing to get to the start line of these events, is earned through patience. And when it comes to these events, a short, fast ramp is almost always going to end badly. Whether that's picking up an injury in training or simply shifting your injury risk to the event itself because you're not prepared for the demands of that race, particularly for longer races, there is simply no workaround for the demands of the much longer distances in terms of training volume. So we're talking about very, very different races depending on the distance. And when we're talking about, say, something like a 50k, we can take our time, build up volume, and particularly if somebody's got a base of half marathons, they're probably not going to be either out on their feet for too long or, to be honest, have such a difficult time completing it. When we're talking about something like, say, a 100 miler, it is an entirely different ball game. For most people, you're talking about probably a best part of a day on your feet, if not more, depending on the races. And it shouldn't come as a surprise to people that something of that magnitude requires a huge amount of training. But unfortunately, we see it all the time where people think they can prepare for these kind of events very quickly. So if you take nothing else away from my aspect of the training side of things, it's please just remember that robustness is earned through patience, and it takes a long time to build up the tolerance. You can get fitter and you can get faster very quickly, particularly with peaking strategies. But all of those smaller structures, the tendons, ligaments, all of those smaller bones in your feet, ankles, shins, they take a long time to adapt. So don't rush it. I think that sums up my first point on the training there.
That's really interesting, Kieran. And look, just for a bit of context, like we've both got a little bit of skin in the game here in terms of ultras. I've had a fair bit of time doing. I've done 100Ks. I've done a self-supported 100-miler. Although not an ultra, I ran 13 marathons in 13 days, which felt like an ultra, the pace I was going at for those 2 weeks. And I know you've got a bit of skin in the game as well with, let's say, doing longer duration. Those key words there, things like patience and time and volume, if someone was coming to you as an athlete and said, I've got a race in, say, June next year, can you start too early with these kind of things? I know you spoke about people leaving it too late, but also can you be doing too much build and potentially pick up an injury or even psychologically get bored with training for an ultra? Where's the sweet spot, do you think, when kind of working back from race day?
So I think in terms of ramping up training, there's no such thing as too early, because of course there's no rule that says you have to keep increasing that ramp. There's no downside whatsoever to having in the back of your mind, particularly if you've got other goals beforehand. So I'm working with somebody at the moment whose first goal at the end of this year is a high rocks. But our program is significantly higher running volume than most high rocks programs because he has an ultra in the start of next year. So it's still in our mind. Now, in terms of the psychological side of things, that's a big aspect. And I'm not a fan of having, particularly for the average person where you're not going to earn money off it, I'm not a fan of having sort of a singular focus for any longer than, say, 6 months. I like to break it up with other events just so that you can mentally have a bit of a reprieve rather than the amount of pressure you put on yourself. If you're training for one singular day for a whole year of your life, as often people do with, say, an Ironman, then what happens if you have a bad day for something completely out of your control? So I'm a huge fan of mentally breaking it up so that at least if game day doesn't go your way, at least you've accomplished a lot of other fun things and you don't feel like you've essentially written off a year of your life with nothing to show for it. In terms of sort of minimum time, it depends massively on someone's current training volume. If somebody's not running much at all, and I see this a lot in the military where sports like cycling or triathlon are very popular, when you're then trying to ramp up for the demands of either one of the arduous selection courses we have or something like a civilian ultra race or anything like that, people who have a lot of aerobic fitness but not necessarily tolerance to running, they're going to need a much longer ramp up to the kind of volumes that are required compared to somebody who's come off the back of, say, a half marathon training program where running volume is probably going to be pretty high. So it's hard to put a minimum amount of time to train on these things. But my rule would be essentially you cannot take things too slowly or start too early, because there's just no rule that says you have to keep increasing week on week on week. There's nothing wrong whatsoever. And in fact, it's a very normal strategy where you might increase training volume for a little bit, hold it steady, then increase it a little bit more. You don't have to keep going up by the 10% rule or anything like that. You can wave load your volume. You can have down weeks every so often. They're all very common strategies to stop people doing too much too soon, basically.
Love it, mate. Really insightful. Thank you. I think some of the key things you've picked out there, again, in terms of like patience and time and volume and exposure, links into my next point really nicely, which for me is about training your gut like you train your legs. I see commonly GI distress being one of the top causes of either people DNFing an ultra or, again, having to slow down because they're just not having a very good time. If your gut cannot handle your plan, it's not a plan. It's a wish was a quote I was told once, and I've always kind of kept that in the back of my mind when talking to our athletes about fueling ultras. I think for me, gut training needs to start. I mean, again, there's no right or wrong time to start it. You could be gut training 52 weeks a year, and it's not a bad thing. But I think if you're working towards a race, an event in the diary, around about 8 to 12 weeks out, you want to be able to tolerate a minimum amount of 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and then slowly try to increase that by 10 grams per hour per week to get to the point where you are hopefully sitting around, one, you can hopefully tolerate 60 grams per hour, but if you can tolerate more, even better. The gut really does adapt via what we call like repeated exposure, and it will upregulate your transporters. So it doesn't just have to be on your long run. You can train your gut by still sipping on some carbohydrate on your midweek run. If you've got a list session on the bike, you can have a gel 2 minutes before going out the door. You can train after having a meal. You've really got to practice eating, drinking, consuming food, even when you don't feel like it. Because, look, if you've never done an ultra, that's exactly how hours 6 onwards is probably going to feel. There's going to be this maybe kind of emotion around, I've got to eat and I've got to get food in me. But I think if you can remove that emotion and just almost, for me, it's a bit of almost like a maths exercise whereby every 30 minutes, I will eat or drink. Like, for me, it is as simple as that. And I've seen people talk about, like, not worry about distance, not worry about, the next checkpoint. It's just being a little bit autonomous with finding a system that works for you. Now, there's many ways to skin the cat, and obviously I've thrown some numbers around here, but I think what's really important is you've just got to practice and expose yourself to different options that are fueling things that logistically, how much can you carry? How much can you pick up at an aid station? What aid stations are available en route? Are you going to use some of the products that they give out, or are you going to stick to what you know? I'm a big fan of controlling the controllables when it comes to intra-race nutrition. So ideally, right, I'm going to get 60 grams per hour from this drink and this bar. And then if you want to top up with a little bit extra or a bit of morale boosting food from an aid station, that's great. But I think if you don't have a plan of cup 1, how many grams of carbohydrate per hour you're going to consume, cup 2, how much fluid you're going to drink per hour, and then potentially if it's a warm race or a long race, or you are a very salty sweater, cup 3 will be utilizing some sodium as well to help with hydration and cognitive. So again, it's almost like another discipline on top of running and navigating and staying awake and staying alert is your nutrition. But it could make or break your race, is having a strategy that works for you. And how do you get there? It's like going to the gym. You want to get better at something, you've just got to put the time in, put the sets and reps in, and it's the same to a certain extent with your nutrition.
I think it's so important, and it's one of those that I don't think you can truly appreciate until you've understood it or certainly experienced it yourself, just how much stronger you feel fueling properly. Even in shorter efforts, something like go out for, say, a 2-hour bike with very little or minimal fuel versus try and push the pace hard, but fuel right at the top end of what you can manage. And the difference is night and day. And once you feel that for the first time, you really start to understand how important it is. And I've got a nice sort of comparison in that there was a big military race that myself and my team were training for over multiple years. And the first year we went for it, there were a lot of factors outside of our control. We were deployed on an operation just before the event, so our training was all over the place, but there was no coherent nutrition strategy or anything like that. I tried to educate people about it, but there was no plan in place. The second year, I took control of it and I said, no, we are being ruthless with this. And I gave everybody a brief on the 60 grams of carbs an hour, which was actually our minimum target to aim for as well. And it got to the point in training where people were competing to try and show off how well they had executed their nutrition plan in training. And what it meant was that on game day, we just got stronger and stronger as the race went on. It was about 12, I think maybe even 13-hour race. Nobody bonked. Everybody did so well, and we pushed the pace right through to the end and ultimately won the race. And it wasn't just winning, it was the difference in how everybody felt crossing the line was night and day. We were so much stronger at the finish line of that second year than we were at the first. We were all broken by the end of the first one because our nutrition plan had just gone out the window, and it just goes to show just how important it is. So thank you, Tom, for everything there. It's very, very helpful. In terms of some of the other aspects of the training side that I think some people massively neglect, and it almost gets put on the back burner entirely in place of just trying to get the miles in, is the faster work. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, because the faster work, so your interval training, your above race pace efforts, not only are they a great driver of aerobic fitness, but they actually improve your running economy. So things like pushing hard sets of 400 or 800 meters, they might not seem that relevant to an ultramarathon, but they're going to make you a better, more efficient runner. And they're also going to make it easier for you to pivot between distances. There are so many people who they just consistently feel the need to, okay, I've run a 10K, I'm going to run a half marathon. Now I'm going to run a marathon, and now I'm going to run an ultra. And they keep progressing up through the distances without ever really putting in the time to become a better runner and not just somebody who runs further. And that's where the fast work comes in. It makes you more efficient, gives you more tools in your training box. It helps you understand what threshold training is, what tempo work is, all of these really helpful tools that will make you a better, more complete runner. And if you look at the best in the world, they are all doing this. So as a really good example of David Roche, he is remarkably transparent about his training. He is a top ultra runner, and he is unbelievably fast. He puts in a lot of high speed, high volume speed work and really pushes the pace on his intervals. And he makes no secret about that. And all of the top ultra runners are doing this. And particularly if you're not making your money from ultra running, you should be doing the exact same too. Don't neglect that faster work in place of more mileage. The two should coherently be part of the same plan. And if you look at any of the Omnia Performance Ultra plans, they all have faster work in there. Sure, you're probably not going to be ripping fast 200s or 400s in a 100-miler prep, but you're still going to be doing some solid tempo or threshold efforts, particularly if you want to be strong going uphill, or you want to be, as I said, a stronger, more efficient runner. So don't neglect your faster work. Even if it doesn't seem relevant on the face of it, it has a very valuable place.
Amazing. Yeah, and that's a good point. And thinking back to the ultras that I've done, I think as well, everyone will go through a phase of dipping their toe in the water probably with an ultra. It's a natural progression, isn't it? You do a half, you do a marathon, you do an ultra. And probably the next thing is you're going to buy a wetsuit, or you're going to go back down the other way. So you're going to go back into marathons and half marathons, etc. So you want to be able to return to that speed work. And I think it is, we talk about being prepared in all things and being 3 to 6 months away from turning your hand to a different race. So you don't just want to become kind of you've only got zone 2 available in your kind of gear selection of your vehicle, so to speak. So I think that's really important. Like I say, it keeps the fun in training. It keeps and there's probably carryover to strength training as well, isn't there, in terms of muscle fibers and force and power production and things like that. So yeah, that's a really good point to consider. The final nutrition point for me, Kieran, here is just I just wanted to talk a little bit more precisely about just fueling and recovering from like big days of training. And when working with our athletes, it's the one thing that can move the needle massively in terms of performing well in training and then supporting recovery and adaptation at the other end. So whether it's a longer session or whether it's a double session, or whether it's just, I just want to go in and rip into these sub-threshold intervals in my midweek on my program, I will say to people, either it's a 1x1 or 2x2 rule pre-workout. Now, what I mean by that is that 1x1 is 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass about an hour before you train. So I'm 88 kilos, roughly, give or take. So aiming for around about, say, 80 to 90 grams of carbohydrate an hour before I train. Now, that's relatively easy to get from food, bagel, banana, bit of honey on it, etc. If I want to use a bit of liquid nutrition or a gel or split it up, across the kind of hour or so before I train. But it's going to help me show up ready, primed, fueled to perform hard or perform for a long period of time. If you've got more time, then you can work back and then follow the 2x2 rule. So 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass 2 hours before you, long ride, long run, big effort session, etc. So say 160, 170 grams of carbohydrate for me. It's a big feed, but it's really going to help you turn up physically, mentally on point. And then out the other end, so you've done your big session, you're feeling a bit fatigued. How do you get yourself back to baseline as quickly as possible? I still see a lot of people under fuel training, and then under fuel recovery, and then over fuel the sedentary activity. So the quicker you can get yourself back to baseline, the quicker you are going to recover from that session, particularly if it's a double day or you're training at night, training in the morning the next day. I know on some of our ultra programs, you've got some horrendous Saturday and Sundays, like double days stacked together. So the 3 hours of recovery are really, really important. We want to replenish muscle glycogen that we've depleted. We want to rehydrate with fluid, and we want to repair with protein. Those 3 things, if you can get a meal or a snack in within an hour that can give you around about, say, 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass, get some fluid in. I'm not too worried about the numbers. Like, just drink. If you want a bit of salt in it, that's great. If you want to use a sports drink, chocolate milk, no problem with that at all, to help just start to replace the fluid that you've lost. and then get some protein in, somewhere between 20 to 40 grams of protein. Now, there's bonus points if you can sneak things like some colour in here, if you want to make a smoothie, have a nice colourful, rich meal. But I've got no problem with people leaning on a convenient product. I've already mentioned chocolate milk. It's a great recovery drink. You can buy off-the-shelf kind of recovery powders. You can get carb powder, mix it with Clearway, and very quickly have something that can tick those boxes and really kickstart the recovery process. It's going to help you probably increase your calorie intake for the day. That's going to help. And then you're probably going to be ready to eat in about another hour later. So it can work really, really well kind of practically, logistically for people. So make sure when you've got big sessions or longer sessions, you are fueling for the work that's required. You're practicing your intra-workout fueling wherever possible. And then you are refueling from that work as well.
I think it's so important because I'm sure you'll agree, Tom, when we have one-to-one athletes join us, I don't think there's a single other lever that we can pull that is so powerful that can have an effect so quickly. Obviously, if somebody comes to us and their training's a mess, we can tidy that up, put them on a well-structured program, but they're not going to reap the benefits of that for several weeks or months. But if somebody's underfueling either their training or their recovery, it can be a night or day difference literally overnight in terms of how well they recover from something. So if you're listening to this, please take away just how important that high carb fueling can be around the session window, whether that's pre or post, because we see it every single time a new athlete joins us, to be honest. I don't know if you could put a number on it, Tom, but I'd say the vast majority of people by default are underfueling, would you say?
Look, I would say, yeah, it's worryingly high. And I use that sentence a lot in terms of, people underfueling the work and overfueling the sedentary activity. I would highly recommend people go to Precision Fuel and Hydration's Instagram page, and they show and have some really good infographics on some of their athletes when they've raced, whether they've done ultras, even 70.3s, different events. One, these guys know their numbers, so they are able to tell the brand afterwards how much they've consumed per hour in fluid, in carbohydrate, in sodium, etc. And I know these guys are obviously racing at more elite level, but it's the same principles that we can apply. If you are underfueling, you are potentially leaving money on the table in terms of performance, recovery, adaptation. We want people to enjoy their training, right? And you're probably going to enjoy it and have a good time and want to get up and do it again the next day if you're feeling fresh and feeling good. And nutrition, can really be that kind of supercharger effectively in terms of supporting everything you're asking your body to do. Because, when you're training for an ultra, you're going to put your body through the ringer. So what you are in control of is what you eat and drink to a certain extent. So the better and the more dialed in and the more aware you are of eating with intent, you're going to have a better time. Simple as that.
Fantastic stuff, and leads in nicely to the final point, really. And this applies to every discipline that we talk about, really, but particularly to ultra to racing, is don't neglect the strength work. And of course, it wouldn't be an Omnia Performance Podcast episode if we didn't talk about strength, because as we've said, we want to be prepared in all things. We don't want to purely go all in on the endurance side. However, I'd like to come back to that sentence that I mentioned earlier about robustness or resilience being earned. And it doesn't just come through the training volume that putting in, particularly when we're talking about running. A lot of that does come through the strength work. And all of the programs that we offer have a really healthy amount of strength work in. And it's a big part of why, particularly in my own coaching career, I've seen so many people do either so well or so poorly in certain military courses, for example, where the demands are very similar to ultra endurance, where the stronger athletes, they just handle the abuse of those events better because they just have more capacity, and it's often night and day. It doesn't have to go very far. We don't have to be talking powerlifter-esque numbers, but a little goes a long way. And once we start hitting some basic benchmarks, once somebody's squat gets to say at least their body weight and then perhaps one and a half times their body weight, for example, we know that as long as their running volume's in a good place, that's probably going to be a reasonably resilient and robust athlete. And when it comes to ultra work in particular, there's a few other aspects that I really like to make sure are in the strength program. And that's moving laterally, moving left and right. So much of what we do in the gym only has us moving either forwards and backwards or up and down. And particularly in trail work, a single misstep might have you fall into a position that you're not strong in. Let's say in the adductors, the groin muscles, and you take a misstep going up a slippy step, for example. When we're strong in these positions, we are so much more likely to bounce back and not even notice it. And I can't tell you how many times I've been out on hard run or ruck march, and I felt a step go where I know that had my ankles been less resilient, that could have been a really nasty day. But because I've spent a long time out on the ground I'm sort of competing on, I've got resilience there and a lot of volume, and then I've got resilience from the strength work that I've done and that sort of lifetime worth of strength that's been built to draw back on. So don't neglect, one, the strength work, but two, just doing it for a long period of time. It should be in the calendar essentially year round for the everyday athlete. There's very, very little reason to ever completely remove it, as many people do in ultra prep, thinking that obviously more miles are better and therefore I'll remove some gym work, get some extra miles in there, and that will see me better. The vast, vast majority of people would be better off keeping in some strength work and reaping the benefits. So there we have it. I think that sums up nicely a huge array of practical information that you can take away in terms of the training side and the nutrition side. So if you have ultra goals, you know where to look. Go to the Omnia Performance Instagram or website, and you can find a whole array of training programs that have been used very, very successfully to complete these events. Please do let us know, particularly in the comments below, if you have any questions, and be sure to tune in for the next episode.